Marcus Whitfield had been selling everything from medicine to mining tools across the frontier for 12 years. But the most valuable cargo he carried was never in his wagon. Hidden beneath false bottoms and sewn into fabric linings were secrets that could topple governments and save lives. And the day he opened his sample case in the wrong town, those secrets nearly got him killed. But to understand how a simple traveling salesman became the most dangerous man in the American West, we need to go back to where it all started. Back to a winter day in 1873, when young Marcus first learned that some merchandise is worth more than gold, and some customers pay with their lives instead of their money. Marcus Whitfield had arrived in the frontier territories in the winter of 1873 as a 26-year-old former telegraph operator from Chicago, carrying nothing but a modest inheritance from his deceased father and an encyclopedic knowledge of communication systems that would prove invaluable in an era when information traveled at the speed of horseback. He was average in height and unremarkable in appearance. Exactly 5 feet 8 inches tall, with brown hair, brown eyes, and the kind of forgettable face that made him invisible in crowds, a characteristic that would become his greatest professional asset. The American West in 1873 was a region in rapid transition, where the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad had accelerated the movement of people, goods, and information across vast distances, but where communication between remote settlements remained sporadic and unreliable. Telegraph lines existed along major routes, but countless mining camps, ranching operations, and frontier towns remained completely isolated from the outside world for months at a time, creating a desperate hunger for news, supplies, and connection to civilization. Marcus recognized this communication vacuum as both a business opportunity and a chance to serve a greater purpose. Using his telegraph background and his inheritance money, he established himself as a traveling merchant who specialized in carrying not just goods, but information between isolated communities. His wagon became a mobile general store that brought everything from medicine and tools to newspapers and personal letters to settlements that might not see another outsider for half a year. But Marcus's true calling emerged when he began to understand the darker aspects of frontier isolation. Remote communities were vulnerable to exploitation by corrupt officials, criminal organizations, and unscrupulous businessmen who operated with impunity because their victims had no way to communicate with outside authorities or seek help from legitimate law enforcement. Marcus began using his unique position as a trusted messenger to carry evidence of crimes, coordinate resistance efforts, and facilitate justice in places where the law existed only on paper. The transformation from merchant to intelligence operative happened gradually over his first 3 years on the frontier. Marcus developed techniques for concealing documents in specially modified compartments throughout his wagon, creating hiding places that were virtually undetectable even during thorough searches. He learned to encode messages in seemingly innocent business correspondence, to recognize trustworthy contacts in unfamiliar towns, and to maintain cover identities that would withstand scrutiny from suspicious authorities. His methods became increasingly sophisticated as the stakes grew higher. Marcus created an elaborate system of coded product samples that allowed him to communicate complex information without ever writing down anything incriminating. A particular combination of fabric swatches might indicate the location of a criminal hideout, while specific arrangements of tool samples could convey detailed intelligence about corrupt officials or planned illegal activities. The network that grew around Marcus's operations was remarkable in its scope and effectiveness. By 1876, he was coordinating intelligence activities across hundreds of miles of frontier territory, maintaining contact with honest lawmen, concerned citizens, and reform-minded officials who shared his commitment to bringing justice to lawless regions. His wagon routes became the nervous system of an informal law enforcement network that operated outside official channels, but with the knowledge and approval of territorial authorities who understood that conventional methods were inadequate for frontier conditions. Marcus's most significant operation began in the summer of 1878 when he uncovered evidence of a massive land fraud scheme that involved corrupt territorial officials, dishonest surveyors, and criminal organizations working together to steal valuable mining claims and ranch properties from legitimate owners. The scheme was protected by a network of bribed judges, intimidated witnesses, and murdered critics who had tried to expose the conspiracy. The complexity of this criminal network required Marcus to develop new levels of operational security and coordination techniques. He created multiple false identities, each with complete documentation and backstories that would withstand detailed investigation. He established secure communication protocols with reliable contacts in major cities who could relay information to federal authorities when local officials were compromised. Most importantly, he developed contingency plans for protecting evidence and continuing operations even if his cover identity was blown or his primary routes were compromised. The investigation that Marcus conducted into the land fraud conspiracy took over 2 years to complete and required him to gather evidence from dozens of different locations across multiple territories. He documented fraudulent surveys, photographed forged documents, collected testimony from intimidated witnesses, and compiled financial records that proved the scope and profitability of the criminal enterprise. The evidence he assembled was so comprehensive and damning that it ultimately led to arrests and convictions that reached all the way to the territorial capital and resulted in the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen property. But the success of the land fraud investigation also made Marcus a target for the criminal organizations whose operations he had disrupted. By 1880, there were bounties on his head from multiple sources, and his cover identity as a simple traveling salesman was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Professional killers, corrupt lawmen, and desperate criminals were all actively hunting for the mysterious intelligence operative who had caused them so much trouble. The crisis that nearly ended Marcus's career came the spring of 1881 when he arrived in the town of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, not knowing that the local sheriff had been compromised by the same criminal network he had been investigating. Sheriff Benjamin Wade had been bribed to watch for anyone matching Marcus's description, and when the familiar traveling salesman arrived with his usual wagon full of merchandise, Wade recognized him immediately from wanted posters that had been circulating among corrupt officials. Wade's plan was to arrest Marcus on fabricated charges, search his wagon thoroughly to find the evidence he was carrying, and then arrange for him to be killed while attempting to escape from custody. The sheriff had already selected his most corrupt deputies to assist with the operation, and he had arranged for the local judge to be out of town during the planned arrest, ensuring that there would be no interference from honest officials who might ask inconvenient questions about proper legal procedures. But Marcus had survived 12 years on the frontier by never underestimating the danger of his situation and always preparing for the worst possible scenarios. When he arrived in Copper Ridge, he immediately sensed that something was wrong with the reception he received from locals who had previously been friendly and welcoming. The subtle changes in behavior, the nervous glances, and the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached all indicated that his cover had been compromised and that he was walking into a trap. Rather than flee immediately and confirm the suspicions of anyone who might be watching him, Marcus decided to proceed with his normal routine while secretly preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. He set up his usual display of merchandise in the town square, conducted business with customers who approached his wagon, and maintained the friendly, talkative demeanor that had made him popular in frontier communities throughout the region. But while he appeared to be focused on commerce, Marcus was actually implementing emergency protocols that he had developed for exactly this type of situation. He discreetly transferred his most important documents to hiding places that were completely separate from his wagon, arranged for trusted contacts to relay critical information to authorities outside the local area, and prepared weapons and escape routes that would give him options if the situation deteriorated into open violence. The confrontation came at sunset when Sheriff Wade approached Marcus's wagon with 4 armed deputies, intending to arrest him on charges of smuggling and conspiracy. Wade had expected to find a frightened merchant who would surrender meekly when faced with overwhelming force. But instead, he encountered a man who had been preparing for this moment for years and who was determined not to be taken alive by corrupt officials who intended to murder him. The gunfight that followed was brief but decisive. Marcus had positioned himself behind his wagon where he had clear sight lines and solid cover, while the sheriff and his men were exposed in the open street with no protection from return fire. When Wade drew his weapon and ordered Marcus to surrender, the traveling salesman responded with precise gunfire that dropped 2 deputies immediately and sent the remaining attackers scrambling for cover behind nearby buildings. But Marcus knew that winning the immediate fight was only the beginning of his problems. Within hours, word of the gunfight would spread throughout the territory, and every corrupt official, criminal organization, and bounty hunter in the region would know his location and be converging on Copper Ridge to capture or kill him. His years of careful cover building had been destroyed in a few minutes of violence, and he would need to reinvent himself completely if he wanted to survive and continue his mission. The escape from Copper Ridge required Marcus to abandon his wagon, his merchandise, and his identity as a traveling salesman, but he had prepared for exactly this contingency. He had cached supplies, weapons, and alternate identification documents at strategic locations throughout his territory, and he had established protocols for contacting allies who could provide assistance during emergency situations. Within 6 hours of the gunfight, he was riding toward a safe house 50 miles away, carrying only the most critical evidence he had been gathering and the knowledge that his old life was over forever. The manhunt that followed Marcus's escape from Copper Ridge was the largest and most intensive in territorial history. Wanted posters with his description were distributed to every law enforcement agency and criminal organization in the region, while rewards totaling thousands of dollars were offered for information leading to his capture. Professional trackers, bounty hunters, and criminal gangs scoured the countryside looking for any trace of the man who had been disrupting illegal operations throughout the territory. But Marcus had not spent 12 years building intelligence networks only to be caught by conventional pursuit methods. He used his knowledge of remote trails, hidden water sources, and abandoned mining camps to stay ahead of his pursuers, while he implemented a complete identity change that would allow him to continue his mission under different cover. The process took 6 months and required him to relocate to a completely different territory where his previous activities were unknown. When Marcus reemerged in the fall of 1881, it was as a mild-mannered traveling photographer named William Henderson who specialized in taking portraits of frontier families and documenting the development of Western towns and settlements. His new profession gave him the same access to remote communities and isolated settlements that he had enjoyed as a traveling salesman, while providing a completely logical explanation for his presence in areas where strangers were normally viewed with suspicion. The photography business also provided perfect cover for his intelligence activities. His camera equipment required large cases and specialized storage compartments that were ideal for concealing documents and sensitive materials. His need to visit multiple locations to build a client base gave him freedom of movement that would have been suspicious in most other professions. Most importantly, his role as a photographer gave him legitimate reasons to ask questions about local history, prominent citizens, and recent events that might reveal criminal activities or corruption. Marcus's new identity proved even more effective than his previous cover had been. Frontier families were eager to have professional photographs taken, and town leaders were proud to have their communities documented by a skilled photographer who could provide them with images to send to relatives back east or to use in promotional materials to attract new settlers. The trust and access that Marcus gained through his photography work allowed him to continue his intelligence-gathering activities with even greater effectiveness than before. The evidence that Marcus collected during his years as William Henderson ultimately led to the exposure and prosecution of criminal networks operating in 4 different territories. His photographs served as evidence in court cases, his documented testimonies helped convict corrupt officials, and his carefully maintained records of illegal activities resulted in the recovery of stolen property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The impact of his work extended far beyond individual cases, as the fear of exposure and prosecution that his activities generated helped to deter criminal activities throughout the region. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Marcus's legacy was the network of honest citizens, reform-minded officials, and dedicated lawmen that his work had brought together and organized into an effective force for justice on the frontier. The intelligence-sharing protocols he had developed, the secure communication methods he had established, and the coordination techniques he had perfected continued to operate long after he had moved on to other territories and other missions. In the end, Marcus Whitfield's true merchandise had never been the tools, medicine, and household goods that filled his wagon, but rather the hope, justice, and security that his intelligence activities brought to frontier communities that had been abandoned by conventional law enforcement. His samples had never been fabric swatches and tool demonstrations, but rather proof that corruption could be exposed, criminals could be caught, and justice could prevail even in the most lawless regions of the American West. The secrets he had carried had been more valuable than gold because they represented the possibility of civilization, order, and safety in places where chaos and violence had previously reigned unchallenged. And the customers who had paid the highest prices for his services had been the criminals and corrupt officials whose illegal activities he had documented, investigated, and ultimately destroyed through patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice that transcended personal safety and conventional limitations. Marcus Whitfield had learned that in the American West of the 1870s and 1880s, information was indeed the most valuable commodity, and a man who could gather, protect, and deliver that information to the right people at the right time could change the course of history and bring hope to places where hope had been all but extinguished by greed, violence, and the terrible isolation of the frontier. If you enjoyed this incredible true story of courage triumphing over corruption, subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things in the American frontier. In the comments below, let us know what you think about Marcus's methods. Was he right to use deception and violence to fight injustice, or should he have worked within the legal system? Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking story of hidden heroism from the untamed West.